Welcome to another edition of Consider This from Brock University. My name is Mike Saunders, and once again I'll be your host and moderator for today's discussion. There's a feeling of excitement in the air, it seems, as the Pan Am and the Parapan Am Games come to Canada. Starting on July 10th, some 7,600 star athletes from the Americas and Caribbean, along with their fans, will converge on Toronto first for the Pan Am, then followed by the Parapan Am Games. Altogether, events will be held at more than 30 venues located in 16 municipalities across southern Ontario. Niagara will be hosting events at two locations, the Royal Canadian Henley Rowing Course here in St. Catharines and the Welland Pan Am Flatwater Centre. Now, hopes are riding high that hosting events at these two locations and having the main action occurring just an hour or so away in Toronto will bring great benefits to Niagara. But will they? And if so, what are the benefits? Here to discuss the impact of the Pan Am and Parapan Am Games on Niagara Region are Julie Stevens, Sport Management Associate Professor and Director of the Centre for Sport Capacity at Brock, Chris Charlebois, Business Development and Operations Director with the Niagara Sport Commission, and Shannon Kerwin, Assistant Professor in the Department of Sport Management at Brock University. So welcome to you all, and let's go around the table first of all for your hopes for the Pan Am Games. And Julie, let's start with you.
The Pan Am Games are larger than the Olympics, and so including Niagara among the 16 municipalities that will host the events in cooperation with Toronto really brings an element of inclusivity for the community of Niagara, the whole Niagara region, and it's an opportunity for the people of Niagara to enjoy a celebration of Canadian athletes and international athletes coming to Canada.
Okay, and to Chris?
From our perspective at the Niagara Sport Commission, our true hope is that the Games will leave a lasting legacy in the community, inspiring more kids and actually people of all ages and abilities to become more active and participate in sport more frequently. Further to that, our true hope is that through some training and acclimatization opportunities, we're able to have teams come in and stay with us prior to the Games and actually help develop Niagara's reputation as an international sport hosting destination through those efforts.
Okay, and Shannon, finally.
They're building from what Chris was mentioning about legacies. I think one of the big things I'm hoping for is that the Pan Am Games will have an impact on those who are volunteering or working for the Pan Am Games here in Niagara, and that they'll increase their civic engagement, their passion for volunteers, and the passion for giving back to their community in their sport. So that legacy will be on a social level in terms of what we're seeing in the Niagara region.
Okay, now we'll open up the floor to the discussion at hand. Usually, in a situation like this, the first benefits that come to mind are economic, job creation, increase in local business, and so on. So let's start with that. What can Niagara realistically expect to gain from the Pan Am Games in terms of the region's economy?
So I think one of the first things from an economic activity standpoint that we can hope to capture anyways is getting some of the teams in to train and stay within the region prior to the Games. In all reality, the two venues only represent about 500 athletes. For Niagara, the real economic driver or opportunity would be to host 10 to 12 teams ahead of the Games, have them stay with us for a week or 2 weeks leading into and do some pre-Games competition and training and that sort of stuff. Beyond that, I mean, there's certainly an opportunity to capture some of the spectators. Many of them will be from other countries, and this may be the only time that they're able to travel to Niagara. And we have one of the seven wonders of the world sitting in our backyard, so it might be an opportunity for us to capture some economic activity there.
I think from the economic impact side, there's the immediate possible benefit of spectators coming to Niagara Region, the event being held in our area. We've had some facilities upgraded in the region which would have created some kind of construction jobs and things like that. But really what the opportunity is more strategic. So Niagara can actually begin to put itself on the map as a sport tourism destination. We all know it's a tourism destination. And strategically begin to say, look, we're able to host events, we have the capacity in our community to host the events, and really look at economic impact of events that we can springboard from really getting the exposure of having those two Pan Am events in our region.
In terms of my opinion on it, I'm just more of maybe a question of where that impact is going to come, Chris. Is there a plan, I guess, in place to promote some of the, not the tourist destinations, because I think that's going to happen with Niagara Falls and some of the, as you say, the wonders of the world that we have, but is there a plan to promote some of the other facilities that we have in the Niagara region that may not be being used by the Pan Am Games?
Certainly. So one of the efforts that the Sport Commission's undertaken specifically is creating some marketing packages and a whole campaign that's gone out to over 600 organizations within North and South America, trying to promote the different types of facilities that we have. So we have, an online magazine, a tablet application that demonstrates some pictures and photos of different types of sports that can be hosted at the facilities. And then further to that, we're putting different packaging opportunities together to say, you can come and stay in a college dorm for $89 a night, or in a local hotel for $150 a night, trying to provide different packaging opportunities based on the needs of the countries. And so we've gone to some different trade shows, had the opportunity to be at conferences that Pan Am has hosted, where they have the chef de mission meetings and things like that. So we've had the opportunity to engage with the decision makers. And so our hope is that through some of these efforts and a few more of the conferences that we're going to be attending over the next couple of months, we'll truly have an opportunity to capture that audience. The decision makers in a lot of cases haven't actually made a decision just yet on where they would like to go, and so we're hoping that we can utilize those opportunities to convince them to come to Niagara.
Yeah. I think that's going to be the key to having that economic impact, is having the strategy to bring people here, not just for the tourist side, but to just showcase we have phenomenal facilities here in Niagara and getting those out there.
And that's a big piece of legacy, is the idea of having facilities that then bring some versatility and some durability to having other kinds of events in those facilities down the line. So certainly with the rowing and the canoe kayak, there's other events that can be held in those venues, dragon boat, open water marathon type swim events, but also the kinds of facilities we now have in Niagara with the Meridian Center. And I know the Niagara Sport Commission has been doing a lot of work creating an inventory of facilities. So then you can, again, put yourself on the map. But a big part about economic impact is also trying to get some realistic numbers to make the case for sport tourism to politicians and business leaders in Niagara. And that's not always so easy. What you'd like to show is when we have these events, whether it be Pan Am's or other sport events we bring to Niagara, what's the incremental business gain for small businesses in the region, as well as what are some of the larger economic activity measures that we can demonstrate to the region municipality as well as city councils. And I don't know, Chris, how the Niagara Sport Commission is able to make that case. I know it's trying.
So I mean, a lot of the type of information will go out to different events and survey spectators and participants, and use the Canadian Sport Tourism the STEAM model, the Sport Tourism Economic Assessment model that the Canadian Sport Tourism Alliance has developed. And a lot of that information will capture demographics, and it'll generate basically a spending profile based on the answers to the questions. So you ask them things like, how far did you travel, how many nights are you staying, how many people are in your group, what type of participant are you, from an athlete to a media person or even a coach, and then what type of things have you spent money on while you're in the economy or while you're in the region, and that'll actually help generate that visitor profile. And eventually what will happen through that plugs in and spits out a number of economic impact that has been supported as opposed to necessarily generated. Meaning that them coming in and spending money in the hotel has actually supported somebody's job, and the tax base being supported within the region as opposed to actually new money. And that's one of the most common issues that we have in presenting that type of information, is you tell someone that an event will have a $4.5 million economic impact on a city, and they go, well, that event's not even going to spend $4.5 million because it's only $1 million budget. Well, really, it's supporting that much activity within the region. It's not actually generating necessarily generating new revenue.
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest critiques of an economic impact study, is the fact that the numbers you can skew them in certain ways depending on which political angle, as we're using some of Julie's terms here, the political angle that we might be looking at. So sort of stemming from that, Chris, do you think that the social impact is just important, coming from the Commission's point of view, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, certainly from our perspective, that's one of the important factors. It's obviously a lot harder to measure, and so I mean, taking the political angle, people like to see numbers and hard data. So I mean, you can certainly make the case, but unfortunately, there's not a ton of research or knowledge base really that we've found so far, anyways, that we can present as an angle to take when presenting to politicians. I mean, speaking from experience, you know, you go out to Vancouver and see what's happened there as a result of hosting the Olympics. I mean, you can see that they've invested in cycling infrastructure. You can see people out running, walking all the time, and in comparison to, say, communities in Ontario, you can certainly see the difference, and you just from talking to people, you understand that it certainly had an impact, but it's a lot more hard to justify.
I think that's one of the things we need to just try and measure, and we'll maybe find a scale that, like you're saying, to quantify that, because it's one of the biggest legacies that can be left, is that even the feeling in the community afterwards of pride and wanting to build the community more because of a games, and that's just the stem. So maybe it's sport, but then they want to be involved in other volunteering activities, whether it's the local cancer society, whether it's volunteering at an animal shelter. So if we could quantify that, it would be phenomenal.
Certainly would. I mean, a really great example locally is the Henley Regatta. So you have an event that's been going on, it'll be the 133rd year this year. And you have a core group of probably about 350 volunteers who've almost all been there for at least 20 years. Very dedicated group, very committed to the cause, but certainly a lot of them have stemmed into other volunteer positions, whether it be with, you know, the rowing clubs or even, you know, Rotary clubs and things like that within the community. So certainly something that we should look to capture.
It's a multifaceted approach to event impact that's needed. You have to incorporate both the social benefits, the economic benefits, and many would say you need to watch the environmental impact of events too. They talk about this triple bottom line approach to measuring event impact, the people, planet, profit kind of approach. But when it comes to the social, especially in Niagara, the need to really build a sense of community is, I think, a focus. And Shannon, I know the research you've done looking at volunteers at events, there's kind of two sides to the social event impact. One is the actual sense of community that volunteers at the event, who are from the Niagara region in this case, gain from their involvement. And then there's more of the spin-off of having the event in Niagara and what it does to build community in the Niagara region beyond the event. So people hear about the Pan Am Games, in this case, coming to Niagara. There's a spirit of involvement. There's a culture that's got a bit of an uptake to it. What did you find with some of the work you've done with the Welling Flatwater Center?
I think one of the big things that we have to sort of, going back to the beginning, and the big things that we're looking at is that the volunteers, there's so many that are required, they are the community. So these are the people, yes, they also are going to come as spectators. They're going to be involved in large numbers with other events that are happening in the community. So what we found was actually being involved as a volunteer at a sport event increased an individual's feeling of sense of community with the other volunteers at that particular event. So those are other community members that they're feeling closer with. And as you said, particularly in Niagara, when maybe there's some people that are struggling financially, or maybe they've disconnected from their family, you need to feel that sense of community somewhere. And if they're able to get that feeling from being involved in a sport event, then maybe they're going to increase their personal well-being. So that's where we're not only tapping into something that is an economic base, but now we're looking at someone's personal well-being. If you increase their personal well-being, then they're going to be more healthy in terms of their lifestyle moving forward. So you're looking at even more long-term benefits that can potentially come from being involved in a sporting event from a volunteer perspective. So a really interesting maybe spin that we can start looking at in terms of what our hosting of events is going to do for our communities. And then that from a political side, Julie, I know that's one of the most important things, is we have to appeal to the politicians. And if we can say hosting an event will make people in your community increase their in terms of their healthy lifestyle and have an increased healthier lifestyle because they are involved, physically active, their personal well-being is increased, and it could potentially have that impact. So if we're able to measure that moving forward, which we started to, as you alluded to, Julie, in that study last year at the Flatwater Center, we've started to uncover some of those positive impacts, which we need to keep documenting moving forward. And the Pan Am Games is a perfect opportunity for that.
Frequently people ask me, do you think having a big multinational large-scale sport event in a country will improve healthy living? Will it attract people to be more physically active? And the research is mixed on that. Sometimes you think, yes, people will carry on in a sport. Young people will be attracted to the athletes, will have goals in mind of becoming a high performance athlete and want to begin to learn to play a certain sport. And on the other side, somehow that distance between high performance sport and really what goes on in a community is a very large gap, and it's hard for people to get involved. So that's where legacy comes into it, and from a community standpoint in Niagara, it would be really important for political leaders and business leaders and community leaders to look at ways to follow up these Pan Am Games, not just in terms of the facilities, but creating opportunities for people of all types, seniors, youth, to get involved in sport, to provide some kind of programming to follow up, and to have access to facilities. Now, Chris, I know the Niagara Sport Commission, in addition to its economic impact work, has done a lot around community development and social development with sport. So how would you see that kind of playing out in a legacy piece?
So actually the timing is kind of critical for us. Last year we started undertaking the process of working with our municipal stakeholders and other organizations or institutions that might have an interest in sport and physical activity. And one of our end goals kind of moving forward is to try and develop a community sport and wellness strategy where we can try to identify some of the opportunities that we have for collaboration to kind of focus our resources and work collaboratively towards getting people more physically active, whether that be through sport or simply going on a walk, whatever it may be. So I mean, the biggest challenge that we have in kind of executing that is exactly around the resources, finding the money to help support programs or the access to facilities, because unfortunately, municipalities have to run like a business in some cases as well and can't always offer facilities for free. So I mean, that's where, back to your argument of kind of for or against these major games, I think it's really critical in planning the legacy, in planning for legacy, because at the end of the day, if whether it's the games themselves or the municipalities are involved, if they haven't really thought about kind of the next step after the games are here, you could end up in a position where you don't really have any resources to fund that legacy that you're hoping to see, and I think that's sometimes where the legacy dies with a lot of these major events.
And the other piece of legacy is building a capacity in the community to host events, as you mentioned, Shannon, with volunteers. So, you start with small, medium-sized events. You build a pool of volunteers that gain experience being involved, not just during games time, but also ahead of games and events to plan. And then as the expertise in the community builds, you can move into the larger scale events. Those aren't so easy to attract. Something like Pan Am's comes around perhaps once or twice in a lifetime to Canada, and then to have it in the Niagara region is even less likely. But you can get some of those small and medium scale events and then be able to kind of continue with that capacity building. So Shannon, with that event that was held with Canoe Kayak, did you get a sense on whether the volunteers were interested in coming back and being involved in other sport events, or were they strictly focused on the Canoe Kayak?
Oh my goodness. That event, so I laughed because one of our questions on the survey was open-ended and they could add their own comments, and the number of people that commented on were getting ready for the Pan Ams. They were volunteering for the sole purpose of preparing themselves so they could put on a show for the Pan Am Games, which is ironic in that international event had about 10 times the number of athletes that the Pan Am section of Canoe Kayak was going to have at the Flatwater Center, but the prestige of having the Pan Am Games there really attracted them. So they were intending, a number of them were intending to not only volunteer at that international event last summer to now volunteer at the Pan Am Games. So interesting in that they were going to continue. There was also a question, do you volunteer in other areas outside of sport and in sport? And I'd say, I think it was about 90% of the survey participants volunteered in other sports or other sport areas. And then there was probably about a 75% volunteerism in other areas outside of sport. So it was interesting, although, and I caveat that with probably bias, in that the people that are volunteering to fill out surveys are probably the people that also volunteer more. So you always have a little bit of bias on that end. But Julie, jumping off your other point, I think one way to ensure or enhance the opportunity for legacy when you're looking at volunteers is concentrating on the management of those volunteers. So it's not just someone coming to your event and volunteering on a day-to-day basis and letting them leave and not following up. I think one of the biggest draws to volunteering again, and this was highlighted in that research, was it was the experience. How was my experience as a volunteer? Not that I wanted to go and watch canoe kayak and how was the event on the water. It was, how was I treated? Did I feel like I was a part of the event? Did they treat me like an individual who was contributing to the success of that particular event? Did I have leadership opportunities? And I think that's one of the things as we plan to move forward into the event. One of the big ways we can impact the Niagara region is giving our volunteers a great experience. Make them want to come back, make them want to volunteer for Niagara and for the region to make our sports community and just our community a better place. And I think if we can capitalize on that, you can kind of build a little bit of the momentum. As with everything, even with the economic impact, there's always areas where you're not going to have an impact, but I think that's one way that we can try to enhance.
And that's a really good point, because I mean, from a regional perspective, one of the objectives that we have through the work that we're doing on behalf of the region is to really try and identify a way that we can create a volunteer legacy within the region. So looking at ways not only how to engage our volunteers and get them to be involved in the event, but post-event, how do we retain them and look at ways that that we can keep them engaged going forward to help contribute to future events. So things like creating recognition programs or leadership development opportunities and helping develop their skill set, whether it be for their current job or looking at future opportunities that they might want to get involved with from a volunteer capacity. So having coaching and certification clinics, opportunities for them to understand how to use social media and things like that. One of the main focuses that we should actually look to is beyond the games in what we look to do to generate new economic activity through the different strategies that we have to motivate teams or different event organizers to come and host our events in the region. And so there's a lot of different opportunities that we have ahead of us to look at involving all of our municipalities. Looking at multi-sport type games that have a large participant base and a long duration of stay. So things like an Ontario Summer Games, Ontario Winter Games, a Canada Summer Games, which could be a long way out. Those, I think, are the types of events that we need to be looking at as a result of the capacity that we're able to build through Pan Ams.
What I really like about the economic impact is the opportunities with other types of events. So the research typically examines the impact of large-scale events, but the reality is there are many medium to small-scale events happening in communities, and when you add many of those smaller events together, your impact can be as much, if not greater, than the once-in-a-blue-moon major event that you have in your community. So we look at something like the Ontario Basketball Association Championships that the Niagara Sport Commission is responsible for hosting in Niagara. There's 2 divisions that will be held in Niagara. Other divisions are held throughout Ontario. But just that event alone is youth basketball, families coming to Niagara, and they're here over a weekend, so there are more than one night stays. So it's interesting to look at the impact of something like that, all the hockey tournaments, all the soccer tournaments, and not to ignore the contribution that those can generate for small businesses in Niagara Region, if you just look at the kind of spending they have, right, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, specifically with the Ontario Basketball Championships, you look at 2 events that bring in roughly 1,500 participants over 2 weekends, probably somewhere around 750 room nights or so. And I mean, those 2 events alone are generating about a $1.9 million economic impact. Add up a bunch of events. I mean, we've been able to do research and do the studies for the last 4 or 5 years now, and I mean, easily amongst 25 events, we can easily say that there's at least been $40 million in economic activity that's been supported within the region. And in all reality, 25 events is a pretty small snapshot of everything that's happening. I mean, all through the winter you have 1 or 2 hockey tournaments happening every single weekend. So it's a small snapshot, but it just goes to prove, to your point, the impact that many small events can have.
Making the case for sport tourism is very, very important. And we probably could focus on 3 key stakeholders. One is the community itself, the people of Niagara, welcoming events, recognizing their value, getting involved as volunteers. The second, of course, would be business leaders. We'd like to see business leaders sponsoring and supporting these events that come to Niagara, and maybe in the long term supporting sport in Niagara for all the community members. And then the last one, of course, is making the case to politicians, which we've already talked about. So moving to the future, like what other events could we have in Niagara? And you know, Shannon, do you think we have the volunteer capacity to move forward in that front?
I'm not sure if we have the capacity right now. I think this is where Chris and the Niagara Sport Commission, I mean, they're doing a lot in terms of what we're trying to do to build that capacity. And I think that the start is to make this Pan Am Games and large events, make that experience one that is positive for these individuals. There is something to be said. You could have one minor negative experience as a volunteer, and one, because we're a viral world, that's going to go viral. People will find out about it, and one negative experience, as we know, is contagious. And I think that is why the focus on managing a volunteer's experience, a spectator's experience, especially in the Niagara region, because there are skeptics who say, why are we doing this? Why are we spending money on sport to host these events? So if we can take what we do have and make those experiences positive and make sure that you spread the positivity, for lack of a better word, then that's going to help. So I'm not sure we quite have the capacity now, but this is where we start. So have these large scale events and make that experience phenomenal. So targeting individuals, making sure that they are feeling useful, making sure that, again, I'm going back to those leadership opportunities. Time and time again in the study we conducted was some people felt that they weren't being used for what they could contribute. They weren't being put into positions where they felt that they were given leadership opportunities, and that significantly reduced their positive experience. None of them said that they had a very negative experience, but I think that when you start to reduce that enthusiasm, then it really does carry over into furthering their volunteerism. But we could start it through these Pan Am Games, but I don't think the capacity is there quite yet. Another key aspect is just looking at the youth. So looking at, now we're requiring our young people to volunteer through their high school hours, but making that experience one that's beyond just, I have to volunteer because I'm volunteering for school. I don't have the answer to that. I don't know how we do that, but I think that's a key to developing some sort of positive community within the young people, because obviously they're going to be the future in terms of who volunteers. So don't just ignore them when they're sitting there as volunteers. I saw this a little bit at the Flatwater Center, and this is to nobody's error in terms of what was going on, but typically when you see young people volunteering, you assume they're just there to fill their hours, and you almost ignore them, which I think is it's sad, because these are who we need to get enthusiastic about the event in their community. So I think that's one way that we could potentially tap in to a stronger pool of volunteers, is to really find a way to hook them, and that would require, I think, some long-term thinking on how that can actually happen.
The research on the young people that you're talking about and why they volunteer, one of the big reasons is to gain skills and experience for future employment. Mm-hmm. And there are so many interesting roles you can have as a volunteer in a sport event. Mm-hmm. There's so many different areas of responsibility that require planning and require opportunities to take a leadership role. And so I really hope the Niagara Sport Commission is able to build off Pan Am's and get that volunteer database expanding for other events in the future.
Yeah, as do we, and I think Shannon's point's well taken. I mean, it's all about taking baby steps and growing the capacity slowly over time. The young people are certainly key to the whole process, as you definitely need to have some sort of succession planning in place as well. You want those young people, as they move into their professional careers, to be able to be in a position to step in and take over kind of these leadership roles that perhaps some of our older volunteers are taking on right now. And I think just to take a different angle on it, one of the things that we've started to look at, again, Niagara's really started, not that we don't have a rich sporting history, but we've really started to position ourselves as an international sport hosting destination probably within the last 10 years or so, which really is a small period of time, all things considered. And so what we've started to do is to take a look at where some of our need periods. I mean, our accommodation partners and attraction partners are some of the people that stand to benefit the most from these types of events. So we've started to look at how do we turn this concept of sport tourism into making Niagara a year-round destination. And so, given the fact that the hospitality and service industry are two largest employment sectors within the region, how can we help support that activity, you know, in the wintertime by creating, you know, an outdoor running marathon or new basketball tournaments, trying to think of non-traditional things. And I think that that's one of the really great opportunities of sport as well, is the fact that it's only limited by your imagination. You have things like Red Bull Crashed Ice, or they have a Wings for Life run that they're doing, you know, later this year. So the fact that you can basically create it from scratch is something that I think actually brings more value to it.
Okay, we're wrapping up our conversation for this edition of Consider This, and it's going to be an exciting time with the Pan Am and Parapan Am Games coming up in July. So, some final thoughts as we go around the table again, what people can take away from what's going to be happening with the games coming up this summer. Let's go around the table one more time, and we'll begin with Julie.
I'd like to say that events that we have in Niagara for sport, whether it be Pan Ams, the large scale, or the smaller events like hockey tournaments, soccer tournaments, are very important. We need to try and understand the impact of these events, recognize that they're both social and economic, and get as much information as we can to make the case for sport tourism in Niagara.
Okay, and to Chris.
Yeah, I'd like to say that I hope as a result of the games we're able to sustain some sort of program to continue to support sport tourism beyond just the economic impact. So I know Shannon will end up touching on this with the volunteer capacity and things like that, but just generating the interest to be able to continue to build momentum and support that culture and create that investment from the community to support the initiatives that we have. And
the last word will go to Shannon.
I think the last thing I want to touch on, and maybe Chris, this will surprise you because I'm going to steer away from the volunteer capacity stuff, but I think what I want the Niagara community, the Niagara region to know, or to just sort of take note of, is that people don't volunteer by themselves typically. They don't travel to spectate by themselves typically, and then they don't participate on their own. And so you're traveling to these events in groups of people who are going to spend money in the Niagara region. So one, as event organizers, we have to figure out how to get these people to spend their money. So whether it's at the hotels, whether it's at the casino, whether it's at restaurants, wherever it may be, figure out ways to engage those individuals who may be coming with a participant or who may be sitting in a group as spectators at an event. So how do you get them to now go experience the Niagara region? And we can do that because there's going to be a lot of people here. It's just a matter of how. So I think it's important as a community and a region to realize that these events can have an impact. It's just a matter of tapping into it.
Okay, and that is going to conclude our discussion on the Pan Am and Parapan Am Games. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion. We've been speaking with Julie Stevens, Sport Management Associate Professor and Director of the Center for Sport Capacity at Brock, Chris Charlebois, Business Development and Operations Director with the Niagara Sport Commission, and Shannon Kerwin, Assistant Professor in the Department of Sport Management at Brock University. Thank you all for coming into the studio for our discussion, and thank you for listening.